Welcome everyone. This is the fourth and final artist talk in our series for our Connections exhibition. I'm Katie Bradford Osborne. I'm the founder of Roaring Artist Gallery, and we are here today to meet some and really delve into the art of some awesome artists, and I'm really excited to hear from them. So we're going to go ahead and get started. This will be recorded, so it'll be available afterwards for anybody who's hopping in late. But I'm so excited to hear from all of you. So what we'll do is we'll start off with a quick little tour through the exhibition. We're just going to be stopping at the artists we're hearing from today. So if you haven't seen the exhibition, it's still going to be up until May 31st, 2021. So go and see it if you haven't seen it yet. But I'm going to go ahead and start screen sharing, and we're going to take a little tiny tour. Okay. Here we go. All right, this is the Connections exhibition. And most everything that we're going to be looking at is in this first room, except for one piece by Dayna and Meredith, and that is in the final room back there. But we'll start here with Maria's pieces. I am so excited to hear more about this project, Maria. I think it is such an important project, and these pieces are so poignant to me. Here's one of Kirsten's pieces. This is the piece that I posted on Instagram today. I think it's and the first one by Dayna and Meredith. That's another project I'm excited about. I love the idea of collaborations that people have had during this pandemic. I think that is such a cool way to handle everything that we've all been through. And here is the piece from Kirsten that was our headliner piece for this exhibition. Journey 2. And then the final piece is in the last room. So we're going to take a real quick jump into the last room. Here we are. All right. Love these pieces. I love the rectangular kind of, almost like prism in some ways. All right, that is everything. Here, let me screen sharing. And so what we're going to do is we will be starting with Maria. I'm going to read her bio real quick, and then I will hand it over to you, Maria, and you can screen share as well. Actually, I need to turn that on real quick. All right. Maria Jose Navas Espinal is a Colombian-based artist. She graduated from Drew University in May 2020 with majors in studio arts and art history and minors in arts administration and museology and photography. She studied abroad in Italy and to extend her knowledge in painting conservation. She continued to expand her knowledge working at the United Methodist Archives and the Historical Center as a book conservator assistant. Currently, she is an intern at the Conservation Department at the Museum La Tertulia. Her body of work is highly intertwined with feminisms, projecting social and political problems against women. All right, Maria, I'm excited to hear from you, and you can go for it.
Thank you so much, Katie. Okay, so I will try to share my screen right now. Put the presentation right here. Okay. Is it on? Yes. Is it working?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you, everyone, and well, welcome to my artist talk. And also, thank you so much for the opportunity to be in part of this show. It was a great show. I'm really happy to be sharing it and being part with of this community. So I don't know. Well, I'm gonna start with I'm really young. I'm still really young. My art is still growing and evolving. But I have always been really focused on photography, and there is something just charming about it. I'm really interested in all processes. I hope in the future I can continue my artist career, but also do a career into into art conservation. So there is something about processes that really attract me, and I guess that's why I'm so connected with the darkroom. So when I started doing photography, I had some background with digital, but I was really focused into darkroom. And these are from like my first photographs that I did in the darkroom. So I was really focused on this part that I started this art career while I started studying in the US. I am from Colombia, and I did all my high school, all my growing part in Colombia. But as I soon graduated from high school there, I decided to come here to the States and start making art, and also I study art and art history. That's what I was interested in. So I started making a series of photography where I would talk about the narratives that I will be living here and the culture here, but also what was my background about. And for a long time, I wasn't really focused on portraiture, and I was experimenting more about other stuff. But there is something about always like emotions and maybe just beings that attract me. So I started, even though I tried to focus on landscape for a while, always return to have these subjects around. And I need, for a while, I didn't understand, but for me, women was important to be part of my photography. I don't know, it was the narrative. I don't know if it's because I went to a girls' school, so didn't really focus what was the reason. And then it came to be like my main subject. I wanted to talk about women all the time. So on my senior year in college, I started working on my thesis that was focusing on art. And at the beginning, I thought about this connection and maybe um, all these processes that I was going after reading 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, where I will have conversations with my friends and family back in Colombia, and they will all be talking about the men in the book, but for me the main character and the character that had such a highly importance was Ursula, the woman, because at the end she's the one who survives all of this, and she makes all she makes all these decisions that go along the book, but also talking about the connection between women and nature. But I understood that I needed something else, that this would work, but it wasn't the kind of job that I wanted to take along. So with me for the full year. So I started making portraits of my close friends. And we started talking about conversations like how did we grow up, what was taught to us. So many of us we will find each other in the same nature of, oh, my parents tell me girls do this, like they have to sit this way and wear their pants this way. So I started thinking about what kind of portraits I wanted to bring in the conversation, because portraiture is such a big genre that I didn't want to continue or just looking like someone's work. I wanted to have my own conversation and maybe bring the public that I will look at my work to have their own conversation about this work. So I start not only taking pictures of my family. The girl on the right is my sister Juanita, but I started talking also about my close friends, not in Colombia, and also, but at the time I was in the US, so I was taking pictures of my friends in the US. But we all kind of like find each other in this way of like, yeah, machismo is real, even though machismo is not a word in English. I will explain to them, and they were like, I totally understand that, and I know in some sort of a nature what you mean about it. So I started making portraits of different people in different ages, and also I started finding connections not only between these characters, because I in the show there is a couple of mothers and there is two co-workers, but also about my connection with my subjects, because a few of the women I barely knew them, but we connected in just the easiest part of we are women and we understand we need to highlight each other and we need to bring each other, not tear each other apart, because that is such a Colombian thing to do. Like women just tear each other apart. We need to support each other and we need to bring more um, to this world where women are just barely trying to make 40 years that we were mistreated, and we're trying to become something more important. So I thought, as I'm telling you, I was highlighting women, and I found fascinating the square frame for it. It's just a different frame. I think I was I wasn't happy with the rectangular square when I started photographing. I started with 35 millimeters, and then I switched to 120. And I don't know. I found that I could give myself the sense, or I could bring myself really together to whoever I was photographing, and I would constructing a perfect frame for them in such a way. I was like, I feel I was making them an honor while I was doing this work. And I also started photographing by three rules. The first one would be I will allow my subject to pick whichever clothes and the space they would want to be photographed. I was not gonna force my subject to pose in such a way, or I wasn't gonna force them to wear what I wanted to wear. I wanted to be themselves, really natural, which is something that in photography sometimes is conflicting, because the photographer wants the subject in such a way, but for me it was more like I need to adapt to these women, because I'm not going to break who they are just for me to get something that I want. It will be me trying to obtain the picture that I would want, but in their space, making feeling them to feel comfortable, and trying to break that boundary of women being told what to do and what to not. This was themselves. And the black and white was just such a way to take away many of color references we have. Because coming from now to cultures, I understand that for some people, I don't know, in Colombia, yellow can mean happiness, red can mean destruction. Meanwhile, here can be passion. Meanwhile, in the US, can be passion. And either way, by experience, we experiment colors in different ways. So I didn't want that to overcome in the sense of who these women are. And more importantly, I wanted to bring up more the emotions, the faces, and the other part of these rules where I didn't want. I think was the only thing I asked my subjects not to do, not to smile to the camera. I was like, there is this typical sense that every single time a woman sits in front of a camera, we always smile. We just try to look nice. I was like, just avoid that. And for a long time, it was funny. Like women couldn't sit there and they were like, wait, what? And easily because of the pandemic, I had to go back to Colombia and finish college there. And it was harder for women in Colombia to actually sit down and pose and not smile. For a long time, I had this one woman that she was like, are you kidding me? Like I can really not smile. I'm like, yeah, no, you need to try to avoid it, because it's this sense of construction we have with gender and also who we are supposed to be. So these are the the three pieces that are part of the show. Two of them, the first one, Lina and Valentina, and also Lina, uh, are mothers, and I found this connection about motherhood really intricate, um, even to me. the woman in the middle center, Lina, she's my mom. And it was hard to try to portray her in a way that it wouldn't be like my mom. And they are both Latino. All the women in these photographs are Latino women. And I think it's a conversation that I needed to open, not just to myself, but also to the community that I am part. Um, and it has been such a big, it has been a really fantastic work seeing what I can not only produce to them, but also to myself. I think it has been a healing process too, with all the stuff about machismo, and also just generically what culture means in Colombia. Yes.
Thank you, Maria. That was so awesome. It is so wonderful to hear from you and to hear how things are different, how things are similar in Colombia and
Yes.
the US. It's such an important thing that you're doing, and it's really exciting to me. Does anyone have any questions for Maria? Let's see. Jessica asks, question for Maria. If studio space, supplies, and cost were not an issue, what alternative process would you like to work in next?
So this is as last year, before the whole pandemic started, I was thinking about doing these portraits in albumen, in a printing method that was albumen. So it would involve eggs and a dark room, and also many more chemicals, because I started being really um, connected with chemistry, weirdly. But so I'm right now working in cyanotypes. My new series of work is on cyanotypes and is embroidery, which is different, very different from what I was doing with Ursula. I think I will go back to the albumen method, just because it's kind of like black and white. It's more, but it's sepia tone, and it has this antique kind of looking that I think brings like what I liked with these photographs. I don't have any prints, to be honest, with me right now, but it kind of, I don't know, like studying art history, I was bringing something to the conversation with how all these portraits look, but how actually new they were, and also the conversation between what the women were wearing, but also they being printing this really old technique from the 19th century. So it was, I think I will go back to the albumen printing if I wouldn't have to deal with studio space or cost, being an artist right after college. Yes, I think that will be.
That is awesome. My in art school, I focused in photography, and it is so cool hearing you talk about it. I loved my time in the darkroom also.
That's great.
Said such poignancy. Yes. I think that's a really great word. That's the word that I sort of kept coming to me also in how you photograph your people.
Thank you.
Jessica's wonderful. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Maria? Well, thank you so much. Oh, go
I
ahead.
have a question for Maria. Do people seek you out now, like to have you take their photograph?
It's actually weird. A couple of women, they, wow, I at the beginning it was just a few of them, and just like a couple of my neighbors, because it become like a thing that I was photographing people in the. We live in this residency complex, so few I photographed this woman in one of like the playgrounds. So everyone was really interested in what I was doing and what is this kid doing in the middle of the pandemic doing, photographing people. So my neighbors have looked up to me to photograph them. And it has been an interesting discussion, because many of these women think that I'm taking portraits just as as a fashion photographer or something like that. So they believe, so they don't believe in my process, which is weird. Um, but I found actually a couple of my friends from the US who wanted me to be photograph them, but by kind of the process that I do. And that's what I'm talking, is really interesting to see how different it is. Like women in the US are more open to hear what you have for them and being open to be just photographed as kind of like the way that I photograph. Meanwhile, in Colombia, I was having like people were annoyed. Like I took a couple of portraits and these women were like, that's what I was not looking for. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. Like it's not. And so I would be like, you're not hiring me to take a picture. Like I wasn't like, I was like, women's like, is it because I pay you? And I'm like, no, this is not even a payment issue. It's just, that's not the work that I do, which is funny. I was like, okay, if you hire me for a wedding, like that would be a completely different story. Like we're making pictures about like a wedding and all the extents of all these means. I'm like, but if you're asking me to take the portraits that I take, well, this is what you can have to expect. I don't know. It has been weird, but yeah, they have asked me, which is I found it weird sometimes, but sometimes not. I don't know. I feel it's more becoming from knowing from whom comes that message. I kind of like know or do not what to expect. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. And Arti has her hand raised. You can unmute and then
Okay. This is beautiful talk. I'm not sure what my question is specifically, but I was stopped and just nearly gasped when you said about when you told women not to smile and how unnatural that felt for them, because
Yes.
I know I don't know, I think in every culture when photography was first invented, people would just stand there stone-faced. But then eventually it evolved to where people would smile, say cheese and all that. And I just wondered, have you studied or looked into where that came from, why that is? And I just love how you are bringing that back to teach women, or not teach necessarily, but just tell them that, you don't have to smile, because, it makes me think too, in America, well, and in lots of countries, when we're walking down the street and all the awful men, who say to tell us to smile.
Yeah.
And I love now that you're kind of turning it into a sense of empowerment to not smile. You don't have to smile if you don't want to smile.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if that's something you like, what you've researched or found. I'm not even, to be honest, I'm not sure what my exact question is, if any. Maybe it was just a comment.
No. I totally understand. And well, I wouldn't say I have studied that specific stuff. Because this was my thesis, I researched a lot of like artists and who was influencing my work. So because I was looking at the 19th century, I was looking a lot to Julia Margaret Cameron's work and how different her portraits were from men and women, because she was taking portraits of really important poets in England and she would depict them with such a like beauty. Meanwhile, women were all like sad and their look was like they would always be disappointed. She made a lot of portraits about the character Ophelia. So I started looking at that and then I kind of like translated to other artists. So I started looking at Justin Kurland's work and her old Runaway Girls, that they are not smiling, but they are portraying these runaway girls that they really don't know where they are or what are they doing or what's next. And also, yeah, it was really different from what I was expecting. And I wouldn't say I know which exact point we started like doing this kind of like thing that women have to smile, they have to pose in certain way, so have to pose how they are being told to do. Uh, so I wouldn't say specifically I know when exactly this started, but there is a big sense of fashion when all the fashion trending started, and maybe we started being more connected with media, and this whole trend was kind of like smiling and poses and specific poses, which was weird. I had this experience when I was photographing my sister that I like stopped, not just because I was wasting my film and I was getting mad because I have this bigger connection with her, she's my sister, but I was like, I'm not taking pictures for Instagram. I remember I told her, I was like, you don't need to act like you're going on Instagram after this because you might not. And she didn't like the pictures at first for like a whole even 6 months, I presented my thesis defense, and she was like, I hate this. They look so bad. But I was like, this is you. Like, I want to, and even my mom would tell her, like, this is really you. And even her friends, they were like, this is like what we normally see from you, like this constant, like straight out looking, like I'm staring at you, and I know, like, she gets annoyed easily. So they were like, you found that way to depict that. But I'm telling you, it's different, and it's hard sometimes. But yeah, I'm actually, yeah, no, I'm really glad you recognize that, and that specific point, because it's hard. I don't know, it's, and I like, actually, that's my favorite part about this work. Normally people are like, when they are seeing portraits, expect such different things, and the smile was such a big point for me. And it's really weird how every single time, even I right now, I don't like taking a lot of pictures for me, so that's kind of hard sometimes. But when I'm in a picture that I'm like, okay, smile, and I'm like, yeah, I'm here. So yeah, but I think media has a big influence in how we look at things and how we are supposed to act. There's actually a huge battle we have to do with our own selves. And yeah.
That is awesome. Thank you so much for speaking to that. I noticed that as well, and that was the number of times I've been told to smile in my life. I think that that was
Yes.
really, that definitely resonated. I really appreciated that. Well, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Maria. I so appreciate you sharing with us.
No, thank you so much, Katie.
Let's see here. There we go. I lost my notes for a second there. All right, Kirsten is our next artist up. Kirsten Sparenborg. Just a moment, I'm going to read her bio, and then Kirsten, you'll be up next to go. All right, as a child in the Midwest United States, Kirsten found wonder and power in discovering and creating. A family trip to Montreal when she was 12 expanded her world and set a course to travel again and again to experience that wonderful sensory overload of historic architecture, bustling streets, foreign languages, and outdoor cafes. Kirsten was able to travel throughout Europe as a student in the College of Architecture at Virginia Tech. And after architecture school, Kirsten worked for 7 years. She authored a photographic book on Virginia towns documenting the fading architecture and stories of boom and bust communities. Kirsten worked for 7 years in Savannah, Georgia as an architect and urban designer. Turn of the Century is the name of Kirsten's art practice. Was created in 2007, and Kirsten began drawing Savannah's architectural streetscapes. The concept of architectural map drawings, a unique combination of architectural facades and maps or plans, emerged as a quintessential expression of the character of a place. The Pelliccia Fellowship from the University of Virginia allowed Kirsten more insight into the architecture and history of Rome during her graduate school studies. Now, as a former architect, historian, and lifelong artist, Kirsten lives in northern New York, where she takes up this long tradition of choreography to describe, document, and cherish great places. All right, Kirsten, I'm so excited to hear more about your process and what you're doing.
Thanks, Katie. All right. Am I screen sharing now? Not yet?
Yes.
Can you see my screen, Katie? Yeah. You can? So it's a go? No, okay. I'm not sure how to. Do I need to do something to share my screen?
Down at the bottom where it says share screen, what is coming up when you click on that?
Okay, let me click on that. Thank you. There we go. Okay. Thank you. So try that again. Is it working now?
No, I'm still just seeing you. Let's see.
Sorry. Try again. Is it working now?
Yes, now we can see it.
No?
No, it is. It
Yeah.
is. You're good.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
That's a fitting introduction. This is my first artist talk, so please forgive any faux pas. As Katie mentioned, my training is in architecture. So yeah, I've never done an artist talk before, but I'm grateful and excited for this opportunity. I thought I would start off with one of the pieces in the Connections show here on the left and introduce you to its family. I completed this series of 9, what I call journeys, just this past winter. And I thought fitting to start with these because they really represent sort of the multiplicity of techniques and materials that I've been experimenting with more recently in my maps. So the map consists of my hand-drawn topographic lines printed onto watercolor paper. And then I've collaged torn pieces of watercolor test strips and failed watercolor paintings onto that, using graphite to add texture and ink line to add some structure, and my handmade pigment paint to add some, to delineate the roads. I've created these abstract topographies, and the idea of these is that I'm envisioning them as an individual's journey through a sometimes unpredictable landscape. And that's where the stitched thread comes in. If you were to imagine this as an individual's journey, the deflection points are really all about the connections that we make in life. So that's where I thought it was really relevant to this brilliant art call for the Connections exhibition. Thinking about these connections in both the physical, in terms of the landscape sense, as well as a personal between humans. Each deflection point, you know, can really be traced back to either the emotional or intellectual landscape we're experiencing. But if you were to imagine hiking, you would have an opportunity to maybe switch back or tack your way up a mountain instead of going straight up. If a valley spreads out before you, of a flat and straight line would be
Kirsten, I think we've lost you. Uh-oh. It must have kicked her out. Let's see if she comes back in just a second. Okay, what we might need to do is go ahead and Dayna and Meredith, we'll go ahead and start with your presentation. Oh, Kirsten, you're back. Okay, good.
so sorry.
Sure, you're good.
For a moment, that never happens. Only when I'm giving a presentation. I'm not sure where I lost you, but I was just going to sort of touch on each of the places that were critical for my artist journey. Beginning in Maryland, where I'm from. I went to high school in Maryland, took art classes, wasn't particularly gifted, but somehow won the Best of Show award there in the high school art show. Went on to Virginia Tech to study architecture. And this, I think, was a critical point for me, because the pedagogy at Virginia Tech is really inspired by the pedagogy of the Bauhaus. So it's all about self-motivated learning. And for me, self-motivated learning looked like really trying to utilize different ways of making in order to communicate my design ideas and then gaining confidence in that. I feel like I really finally learned to draw through an experience I had in the European travel semester, and I'll show that work. Self-motivated learning looked like taking pottery classes. There are no drawing classes, so it was really, really indeed self-motivated, but it did not look like taking AutoCAD. So here I am giving an artist talk instead of working at a firm. Anyway, after graduation, I decided to continue to foster this project I had started in an Appalachian Studies and Photography course, where I was traveling all over the state of Virginia and documenting small towns that sort of had these architectural emblems of towns, but they were buildings that had seen better days. They were dilapidated or ruined. To my eye, they were beautiful, and I took black and white photographs with the SLR and medium format camera, and paired that with the stories that over 60 residents I interviewed told me about the boom and bust in these towns. And that was published by UVA Press in 2011. It was made possible because I was working for a nonprofit called the Community Design Assistance Center at Virginia Tech, and was able to get grants for the project. After that, I decided I should try my hand at being an architect, and came to Savannah, Georgia, where it was just a beautiful place to draw. And luckily found a job with a very small, very dynamic firm who did a lot of urban design and architecture projects in Savannah, as well as Charleston, South Carolina. If you've ever been to Savannah, we designed the SCAD Museum of Art. And my role in the firm was primarily, there was just 3 of us, but so I did a lot of everything, but primarily historical research in site design and site analysis. That caused me to really hone an interest in historic maps, which later led me to graduate school after my 7 years in Savannah. On the side, though, in my limited spare time, I did keep up my drawing practice and drew numerous streetscapes of Savannah, and continued drawing streetscapes during my sort of gap year in Washington, DC. One of those streetscapes is there on the left. I completed my master's program at the University of Virginia, writing a thesis on maps of Savannah. And that was really a powerful deflection point too.
See if you can screen share again. Like,
oh, it's not screen sharing all this time?
We were just listening, and like, it just,
wow.
It just hit me. We're supposed to be watching too.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. Here we go. Got it?
Yes.
So there's some of the images. There's some images to illustrate what I've just been babbling about.
No, it's been wonderful.
The black and white photo is from the Lost Communities of Virginia book. The sketch in the upper left is one of my European travel sketches. And then the streetscape is one of many I did of Savannah. Much more on the work later, but after I graduated, after 2 years of intense reading and writing, I was really anxious to take up my art practice again, and experimented a lot for about a year, but then was also starting my family. So kind of decided to make a more efficient practice and hone in on what I call watercolor city blocks maps. You'll see one of those in the lower left, which is Upper East Side Manhattan. So this was a process that I devised where I could make work by commission and still sort of have a meditative flow to my practice, given that my time and my mental capacity were limited while I was having babies. So I continued that practice in Tacoma, Washington, and now here in Northern New York. I suppose I've been doing the watercolor maps for about 7 years, and I've mapped about 150 different cities. Over the past year and a half, though, with COVID definitely throwing me a deflection point, I allowed this brush to be free from the confines of the city grid, and really enjoyed experimenting with the brush marks on watercolor paper, and then adding, of course, the graphite lines and the ink lines, and even doing some abstract and collage pieces. So that's the overview. Let me just dive into the work. hopefully. There we go. I mentioned this quintessential moment that I had as an architecture student when I was in Europe. And this is where I feel like I learned to draw. I did not know how to draw when I went to Europe. And I was completely overwhelmed by the tactile sensory qualities of these ancient spaces and completely depressed that I couldn't convey that sense through drawings or photographs. So in this little step village in Ticino, I started to draw while walking. And I used these pretty standard modes of representation in architecture: plan, section, elevation, and perspectival views. But I combined them together so that I was drawing what the salient feature of the space that I was inhabiting at the moment. And I was drawing it in the mode of representation that seemed to best convey how it felt. So these are some of the sketches in that vein from my first, travel in Europe. And then I traveled several times since. But so these kind of like the walls are splaying out from my path. The one on the right is a monastery where I've drawn the plan, and the interior and exterior elevations are splayed out from the plan. And I did not conceive these in color originally, just black and white, as architects were very black and white. But a year ago, I decided to revisit these sketches and printed the stand drawings onto watercolor paper and used my new best friend watercolor to revisit them. And I really loved the experience of having all the feels that I had when I originally drew them on site, but also adding this texture and the color, which was reminiscent of how I felt during the experience. Had another opportunity with the University of Virginia to travel or to study in Rome for 5 weeks. And this study was based upon the questions of my thesis. I was looking at 19th century bird's eye view maps of Savannah, and really wanted to understand better its lineage in the Renaissance bird's eye view maps, which are these incredibly complex, but also pretty accurate maps of the city that just got into the details of even building footprints and all the little openings and spaces. And I would spend my days in the city sketching in the round in these public places. And in the evenings, I would go up to the Gianicolo, which is an escarpment above the city, and draw from above. I mentioned that streetscapes were my main way of drawing in Savannah, but I also continued to draw these in places that I traveled to. And just a few years ago, created a couple digital collages of my hand-drawn streetscapes. So in this collage, you'll see the shotgun houses of New Orleans, Brooklyn brownstones, side porch houses of Charleston, various Savannah streetscapes, some iconic buildings of Baltimore, and some Philadelphia streetscapes. But the origin of these streetscapes drawings was really Savannah, and the form that they took was handmade books. So I made a couple different types of handmade books. This particular one was a run of 50. In the back, there was a pocket, a folio, and you could pull out this hand-drawn map that I made of the city in 1916 as sort of a architectural, the height of its architectural density. And I made some mini ones, which is the upper right image. So it's an accordion book. It would fold out all the way or just flip through like a regular. I'm going to flip through it pretty quickly because I know I'm short on my time, but this was Jones Street, which was the primary residential street in the city, a fashionable address that had generous tree lawns and giant live oak trees dripping with Spanish moss, which were wonderful for walking down the street, but obscured this great architecture. So I took advantage of my proximity, living just 2 blocks from Jones Street, to make the drawings in my apartment by hand from photographs, and then pop out to check on something that I couldn't see behind a tree limb. And that was good practice for this commission that I did for the Tides Museum and Institute of Art in Eastport, Maine. It's a formerly industrial shipbuilding town that's reimagining its future through the arts. And I had, my screen just went black. Can you still see? Oh, there it is. I had the opportunity to kind of make this commemorative piece for their museum, and then they sell prints of it. It has some historical information about the buildings in the bottom. And this little thumbnail image is my next project for them, which was a bird's eye view. So this is kind of cool to kind of combine my, having trouble getting to the next slide, my interest and research in bird's eye views. Dang. Okay, there it is. This is a multi-year project. When I began, I was looking at aerial photographs and trying to draw from those. And over time, Google Street View became available. So I was able to virtually walk down the street and draw the building facades as I saw them. So it was really interesting to feel like I really knew Eastport, but I've still never been there. Hopefully this summer. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry, my slideshow isn't cooperating. I suppose it's probably my internet too. Let me check on that. Looks like my internet's slowing again. Okay, finally the watercolor maps, which I consider the mainstay of my work. I create these by commission, first drawing an incline drawing of the street network, and then I use that as an underlay to watercolor the blocks. The colors are chosen by the client, and I just enjoy this meditative process. These are some of the larger ones that I've done that are 3 feet. And then, as I mentioned, this past year and a half, has been one of exploration. I really wanted to free the brush from the confines of the city grid and see what it can do in terms of making a variety of textures on paper and adding in graphite lines and ink lines. So I thought the mountains were a fitting vehicle for exploring these textures. The one on the left is a Carrara marble mine in Italy, so lots of great rock faces. The one on the right is Cape Town, South Africa, and I used my handmade pigment paint here. The piece in the middle was the first one. I just grabbed a household paintbrush and marked the darker recesses of this rocky mountainscape, and then added the lines. The other 2 pieces are New Mexico. Mid-fall of last year, I completed this collection of 46 mountain paintings, and it was really satisfying to combine the lines and brush strokes for me. Continued that combination into these explorative maps, taking it back to map this year, and the piece on the left is in the show. It's called Crossing, and I really found a lot of material lying around my studio in the form of misprints or watercolor test strips or failed paintings, and that's when the collaging started. In fact, the piece on the left, Crossing, is my topographical lines as an underlay for a watercolor painting were printed, but the printer stopped midway. So the texture that you see on the left is those hand-drawn lines printed, but it gave me an opportunity to imagine a new imaginative landscape. And I did a series of about 30 of these pieces over the past several months. Finally coming back to real places, and I can do these pieces by commission now too, where I'm drawing the topographical lines and then adding watercolor. The piece on the right, I feel like, is emblematic of the various types of textures that I've been drawing and painting, all coming together on this map of the Blue Ridge. That really adds relief to the mountains and context to where the settlement points are. So all in all, I'm just so grateful for art as a vehicle for expressing the sensory experiences that I've had in special places, and especially recently for the opportunity that it gives me to imagine new places when I'm not traveling. So thank you for your attention and patience. I'm on Instagram at Turn the Centuries. Would love to stay in touch. Any questions?
Thank you. Arthur said the intricacy of these drawings is absolutely mesmerizing. And then she said she has a question for you. Can you please describe the process of making your natural pigments? And is that something you plan to keep pursuing in your work?
Yeah, for sure. I don't really have any images to that, but the process is basically I go on outings with my boys to local, generally places where the landscape is exposed by a cut in the road, or there's a gorge where I find most of my pigment. And I'm looking for rocks that are easily breakable. It doesn't have to be that way, but I'm not brave enough to take a jackhammer to rocks yet. And I don't really know what's in there, but I do wear a mask just in case, but I ground up the rocks in my mortar and pestle. And it takes a lot of time to ground it up to a really fine powder. There might be some sand that I might need to sift out. And then I've made via a recipe binder, which is what makes it a paint, and adding that in the appropriate amount, and mulling, which is, I don't know where my molar is, but so I'm using this glass molar, glass that I haven't cleaned yet from my last, and I'm combining the pigment powder that I've created by crushing the rock and the binder that I've made. It consists of distilled water, acacia, clove oil, maybe something else. Anyway, I'm combining those in the right consistent proportions, and then like moving it around with this molar for a long time. It's also a meditative practice until it gets to the right consistency. And it looks like this. Not that pretty, but the colors that I find here are, yeah, this sort of yellow, brown, ochre color. And depending on where you live, you'll find different colors. So that's kind of cool. I love the idea of making paint and potentially someday actually making paint from the place that I'm mapping, you know. I'm working slowly towards that goal.
That is really cool. That's, yeah. I think this is a fascinating part of your practice. I'm glad that Arthi asked. I was going to if she didn't. But she said very cool.
Thanks, Arthi. I'm glad you're here.
Do we have any more questions for Kirsten? Well, I just loved hearing how your practice has moved from, oh, Meredith has raised her hand. Go for it.
Kirsten, how do you decide how many pieces are going to be in a series? Like, do you kind of plan it in advance that you have the ideas already so you know it's going to equal that amount, or it just so happens? Or how do you know when you're finished? Because I think that's a really interesting part of your practice, to be able to say, oh, this one had 46 or that one had 32.
That's funny because I'm always like sure of how many pieces there actually are there. Maybe it's 46. Yeah, like when I talk about it on social media, I'm like, it's 92 pieces, and then it's 80, and then it's 95. It's just whenever I'm done. Like with the mountains, I was just done. Like I just did my last piece, and I didn't really feel like I wanted to make anymore. So I've only started working in collections for the past year, and I've realized that I tend to over create, and I probably need to edit more. Like maybe there's 30 good pieces in those 46. So going forward, I'll be more conscientious about editing, because like the travel sketches that I released a year ago was almost 100 pieces, and that was my first collection. So I have editing issues, but yeah, it's
I like the density of it.
I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the density is very powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, I could see this becoming more books. Like that made sense to me, and I could see a lot of
books.
And I love that. I think that that was really cool to hear, because I didn't know about the books before, so that was really interesting.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about them too until I made this presentation. Yeah, Yeah, it was a process trying to condense 25 years of making into, well, I guess it didn't quite make it into 15 minutes, but anyway.
You're good. Well, it's been
Thanks for
wonderful.
the opportunity.
Oh, Maria has a question for you.
I wanted to ask you, I am recently working with embroidery, and I wanted to ask you, with your practice and the pieces about the mountains, why did you start making it? Like, why did you start using embroidery? I know you're making collages, but I wanted to know in your narrative, what was that? I wouldn't call it necessity, but also why were you attracted to it?
Uh-oh, did we lose Kirsten again?
Oh,
there you
oh
are.
no, my internet connection.
Yeah,
Okay, sorry.
I'm afraid that's time.
Okay, Maria, I thought those pieces were complete, and it was really what I was experiencing personally. I think I posted a photograph on Instagram about no one's path is straight, and then I'm thinking they're complete, and then I just kind of had the idea that really, like, I want a path through these, and because I had so many different, why not throw another one into with the stitching, and I really enjoyed that too. It's just
That is awesome. Well, I'm glad that you did, because that really drew me in for the theme of connections with this particular show, obviously, since we used one of your pieces as the headline piece, but it was just so perfect for what this show was about to me. And I thought that it was, I loved it. I love that addition as well. Does anybody else have any more questions for Kirsten? All right. Well, Kirsten, thank you so much. That was really, really cool. I love your background is so different than about any other artist, really, right? Like, how many architecture artists do you know? And I think that it's really, really cool how it leans into your work as well. Okay, let me pull up. There. All right. Our final artist is actually two artists. It's a collaboration between Meredith Starr and Dayna Leavitt. It's called Are You There? Are You There is a photographic collaboration between Dayna Leavitt, a photographer in London, and Meredith Starr, an interdisciplinary artist in New York, born during the pandemic of 2020. These video projections are their connections, trace evidence of their digital conversations during the pandemic, an ambiguous reflection of observations that blur where one ends and the other begins, and the creation of an escapist imagined space and place. I am just fascinated with what you're doing, and so you guys take it away however you want to.
Okay, I think Meredith will kind of kick it off, but I'll share the screen, hopefully. Sorry, bear with me a second. Let me just, whoop. You weren't supposed to see that one. Okay. Are you there?
Okay. Oh, I have to move the
oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Whoop.
We're really
okay.
There you go. Okay. So first of all, Katie, thank you so much for having Dayna and I in this show. We were talking yesterday about how it feels fortuitous because some of our first images made it into what is our first show together. Dayna and I were roommates in college and art school at NYU in the late 90s. And we actually had I was thinking about this too, like the talk today is really bringing up so many memories, but we had a show together called Objects of Desire in 2000 because, you know, we weren't working in the same media, but very often when you live with someone, you sort of develop parallel interests or themes in your work. So it was very fun to dig up some old photographs, but also even then we were sort of both looking to the world around us. And then during the pandemic, I want to say that, it was a really, I mean, for so many reasons, it was a challenging time, but also as an artist, when the world shuts down, it's very hard to feel creative and inspired. And so I felt like we were probably talking to each other more than ever, but a lot of our communication was just sharing what we were experiencing daily and, communicating, what did it look like in New York? And I wanted to know what it looked like in London, or when you're feeling extremely lonely, just being more connected was even over text message was a way to keep your sanity. So there's a picture of us in art school, but then the pictures on the right are photographs. That one's out my front door, and out one of Dayna's out your window.
Yeah, it is. It's off my balcony.
And the funny thing, I can't believe, Dayna's been there a little bit over 10 years, and still, so I feel like I see her so often in New York that work and family has brought her back so often that I feel like it hasn't caught, we've always managed to keep this thread of our relationship, but I haven't been to London yet, and the pandemic, I feel like I've had such a better sense of where where you are and existing, and of course, now, thank goodness for vaccines, so I can come and visit. But so much of this project was, I want to say, unintentionally an art project in the beginning. It was really, how we were communicating and, holding on to sanity in the beginning. Do you want to go to the next one?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and also, sorry, but you have the note up there too that the titles for our pieces also we took from text messages too, and even the title for the piece. Even now, when we write each other, very often because of the time difference, half of we always almost start with "Are you there?" Because our communications are often at unique times of day. But if I wake up at 4 a.m. in the morning, it's nice to know that Dayna's probably awake having breakfast, so I can start with "Are you there?" So the whole project is fairly organic, which is something I really love about it.
Okay, should I go to the next one? Okay. Well, we thought we would just kind of give you a little kind of overview of just sort of what our work is like separately. And I think, as Meredith mentioned, even though I think a lot of our work is actually, I think, by nature very different in medium, there's a lot of very common themes that run through it. And I think to kind of kick off, I have to say, I think just a very big thank you to Meredith, because actually I think she, I had taken a long hiatus from making work for a while, and she kind of brushed the dust off of me sort of, in the last year, and kind of got me working again. So it's been a really nice outlet, and, just a really fun thing for us to do together as friends and as artists. But I think some of the things that I've kind of found looking back at my old work, and kind of some of the new things I'm starting to focus on independently and as part of this project with Meredith, is there's a lot of this kind of observation and sort of collection and documenting. And, it's interesting to hear Maria and Kirsten talk about their processes, because I realize it's not so unique to my work. I think it's just every artist has this kind of obsessive role, I think, in some of the things that they do in their process. And for me, it was very much this collection of kind of constantly sort of documenting in this kind of voyeuristic way, but I think sort of without sort of judgment. And there tends to be a lot of figures in the subject matter, but it's not necessarily where I feel that it's my, that I'm sort of watching them. It's not really the sense of connection, but it's just, they're just kind of there. And sort of to the left was this series that I did about 20 years ago that was just obsessively taking these photos out of the kind of peephole in my front door of my apartment building at the time. And it turned into, and this was back when we used film, so that was actually quite an expensive project, but it was just, I sort of had this tripod set up, and just over and over, and it became this kind of thing that it was like this activity. And I've realized over time that's sort of been this thing that's kind of stuck. I recognize that actually sounds kind of creepy as I say it now, but I also kind of realize it's just this kind of slightly voyeuristic, but I think, again, without this kind of, it's just sometimes there's nobody there and sometimes there is. So, I think kind of looking to the middle, this was something I was working on a couple of years ago, back when we could travel. And I'm fortunate my professional life has kind of sent me traveling to many places in the world. and this was in Hong Kong actually, where there was the hotel room was looking out over the water, but this building across had this man, and it was like 1 a.m, and he was just painting, and he was moving all over the place. And I sort of just, for like about an hour, I was just sort of constantly collecting these images. And I've realized just over time, there's this kind of theme throughout where I don't want to feel like an intruder. But I guess it's just kind of voyeuristic curiosity that we all sort of have in us, and sort of documenting that. And then moving forward to some of the pieces that Meredith and I have been working on, again, it's just through the pandemic when you're like stuck at home, it's just that window is literally like so important, that view of just what you can see and what you can share with other people. And just some of the views and things that I've been working on that take on a kind of different look. But, I think, again, a lot of those threads are still running throughout.
Okay. There's so many things, like, I get excited when you talk, and then it's like, oh yeah. And I love seeing your work so much. Even especially the Hong Kong series, but also because the last time you were back here and we went for the walkthrough in the cemetery, and I feel like it's interesting to see how we've like grown as artists, but the things that still interest us that like have carried over throughout the years. But as you were saying, also like hearing Maria talk and Kirsten, there is this, the theme to this show is connections, and hearing everyone talk, I think there is a connection between all of our work, right? This idea of connections. And Kirsten, like I had also done a series in maps, and Maria, I've been working in cyanotypes. Actually, my friend Sarah's on the call, and we've been collaborating in cyanotypes. And there is this commonality about finding the right medium for the project that you like that would best express it. And so in the image on the left is something I've been collecting a year's worth of plastic to comment on just how much one family could accumulate and raise awareness about the impacts of plastic on the environment and climate change. And it actually spent over a year developing a virtual reality project about it. And so I feel like that's like that technology has sifted into this project in terms of being so entrenched in something that was like this very intense technology that required a lot of mastery and learning. And then the pandemic hit, and I was so burnt to be able to return to that. So, what Dayna and I do, and we'll talk about it in a slide or two, is, this much more relaxed technological process, but I like the conversion from high tech to something that's more accessible. But in the piece on the right, is an example of one of these installations. I guess I do. It started, maybe a few years back with my younger son, we were out east, and he would bring me all these things he found on the beach, and he'd say, let's make a creation. And so I started working with all these, if we go to the beach, which was another pastime during COVID, we'd go super early at like 6 a.m. so that we could get out of the house. But just making these collections of organic materials that could be found with debris, like Dayna sharing her screen, but if you look to the right, there's like a glass and a plastic straw, and just sort of using these collections of objects, both found and natural, to comment on with a little bit of judgment, right, about climate change and pollution, but just recognizing how the sense of like observation is part of my artistic practice, and like like outward looking and slow looking at the world around us seeped into what I'm doing here with Dayna. And so much about collecting, whether it's collection of images or like collecting the moment, I want to say, and taking stock of where you are and being present, that's sort of seeped into. Okay, I think.
Next one?
Yeah.
Oh, why is it doing? Okay.
Okay.
Right. So our work together, I think we've kind of given a little flavor, I guess, of what, our work separately is. But I think what Meredith just mentioned is, this kind of, I think, turn towards things that are just, they feel a little more like organic and kind of lo-fi. And I think just the nature. And it was kind of interesting for us to listen to Kirsten in particular, just because I think there's like a lot of parallels to what we're creating, I think is kind of, I think an inspiration. And I think even with Maria as well. But what was so kind of unique for us to do this talk was that it just sort of happened that this was actually the first thing that we did. This was our first image that we created as part of this process, which is the one to the left. And then the one to the right, again, was, I think, kind of straight thereafter, where we were just, again, this kind of call and response idea of where we were sort of just sending these images and sort of, you know, sound, just like collecting a lot of material together and just sort of sending it back and forth. And it was like, again, like, where did you go for your walk today? And what did you see today? And somehow these kind of mundane things in your own daily life become actually very exciting to somebody else, because it's this kind of sense of escapism or kind of like a new view that you're kind of giving it life through somebody else's eyes. And I think when we realized we could sort of put them together, it became this whole new layer of excitement for something that actually is just like, that's that shadow that's on my wall every day. And I've just never really thought about it, but somehow it takes on this kind of very beautiful kind of meaning when you start to place it somewhere else. And so I think what we thought would be a little bit interesting is just to kind of share like how literally this came about. And it's a very almost embarrassingly like lo-fi way that we started working. It's just because we realized like we would upload everything into like Google, just so we had a shared space to kind of upload all these images because they were just like collecting. And then we kind of started to just think about like layouts of just composition. And it went into Google Slides, which we've actually kept using as a method because, and I think sort of like my husband was like, what are you doing? And I think Meredith as well was like, that's how you guys do this? It's something that we can actually do where it's like, it's live and we can go in there together and there's like a chat function. And it actually means that we can sort of move things around in real time and kind of say, okay, well, like, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? And I think in the bio that Katie read, we had initially kind of designed some of these with the thought of being projections. And so, you know, we've kind of done it where they're more sort of just as a colored print. We've had others where we've presented them as kind of a projection of like a series of images. So some of them, sometimes it's even, I think you can see, sometimes it's a bit of a video and we'll take like, you know, snaps from that. Or sometimes we actually are thinking about how we can incorporate like moving image and sound going forward in these kind of layers of our work. So it just kind of gives, oh, sorry, I can't get it to stop.
Oh, I like them running at the same time. That was cool. I don't think it's been able to
like a little glitch. But these were just like some iterations of how, oh, sorry, I don't mean to keep playing these, of like how it came about, where it's just sometimes we will like insert an image and sometimes I'm like, I don't know if that's working. And then Meredith is like, oh, let's try this. So it becomes this really fun, just process and a different way of kind of seeing the world of, you know, from, I think, the other's point of view. And particularly this kind of window concept, it was not really so deliberate, but I think just because of the way that we were living our daily lives, you know, sort of over the last year, it was just sort of naturally a big part of what we were collecting. And so you can see it kind of goes through this, you know, we're getting slicker and faster and sharper. And I think at first it was kind of like, you know, we'll put this in and you want to be really sort of considerate of the other, you know, and kind of what feels right. But now it's like, we just have this real sense of trust between us where it's like, because of the time difference, I might be working late at night and I kind of, oh, you know, I threw this thing together and in the morning I wake up and Meredith has like done something totally new to it. And we just sort of let go and it just becomes these kind of layers of, you know, kind of new ways of thinking about it. So I think it's a really fun, interesting process for us. And this is kind of an example of, I guess, what it sort of looks like.
Yeah. I mean, it's fun thinking about that too. Like also when you've lived with someone, right, you do get to know them really well. And then I was thinking about the work that we were making back in art school. I mean, I think we also both have this awareness of what the other person is interested in particular and attracted to. So I also wonder if like subconsciously, like that seeps into what we're photographing for the other person, because it makes me think about what Maria was saying too, like you're taking the photo both for yourself as like a moment of documentation, but you also know that you're sharing it with somebody else. So I'm sure there's always this moment of like, oh, Dayna would like that, right? She'd appreciate that.
We've become very conscious, I think, of like, again, the kind of mundane in our daily life, or just exactly as Meredith said, you know, what are the things I want to share? So, you know, when I go out for a walk and my husband's like, you're lagging behind, and I'm like, oh, but I'm like taking this picture for Meredith. And, you know, I think it just becomes, you know, just a whole new way of looking at things with this kind of heightened sense of awareness. And, you know, there is this kind of thing that I think just naturally happens is like, we become really obsessed with the images the other one's taking, where I'm like, oh my God, I love that. I have to figure out what to do. And it like inspires you to then go collect more that you think will either sort of contrast or complement an image that somebody has sent you. And then I think I'm always kind of thinking about a composition in my mind when Meredith sends something to me, and I'm just like, right, so now I need to find something that's like blue, or something that sort of complements that shadow with a sense of light, or whatever it might be. So it's really like, we always kind of refer to it as a bit of a sort of like call and response type of communication. And then again, like the titles, as we mentioned, just sort of the natural string of our kind of conversation every day. We sort of go back and read through and kind of yank things out that we feel like sort of reflect, I guess, the mood or the conversation of, what we've created.
I almost feel like we should get the husbands on the call too, because like what would happen is like Dayna would send me these amazing night walks. And so then I'd say to Patrick, like, can we go for let's go for a walk tonight? And it would, but that would be, not that we wouldn't want to do that anyway. We've been stuck in the house and working from home, but that like very often the motivation for the walk is like, oh, I saw this and now my brain is like searching for how to fill that in. And it's never forced. We always do find something on the walk, but there's a certain like, you can go walk, you can keep walking, Patrick. I'll catch up with you in 3 blocks because this is on a light rotation and I need to capture this light show in the window. So it's definitely impacting the others in our life too. But I think if you want to click through the next few slides, sort of show, like it's really about like also this awareness too of like, if we're moving in the car also, and like these very, like, I love this one too, has like a splash in the pool. And if you look very carefully, like these very small figurines, right? And I think in a way the project has made me more present and aware of like, of where I am, and a walk maybe I've taken 100 times. Like I'll challenge myself to say, what do I see different here that I can capture? Also, our color palette is starting to skew blue, I think.
Yeah, that is kind of just naturally happening, I've realized. But I think it's also, to Meredith's point, it's like, well, you'll see more in the next one. Like sometimes it's just seeing something in a really different way and just kind of creating this new sense of context that I think is really very cool about it. So like, for example, like, and it kind of starts to become unrecognizable, I think, in its original form, that, what actually is in sort of the background and the layers of this image is actually pretty complex. Because like most of the time we start everything in Google Slides just as kind of a layout. Sometimes it stays that way if we feel like it's done. Sometimes we pull it into Photoshop when we start kind of, recreating it or sort of giving it a little bit more life. So every piece kind of has a slightly different way that we approach it, I guess, because it is just a very organic kind of way that we kind of say, is like, to kind of Kirsten's point, it's like, is it done? I think it's done. I feel like it's done. But this was actually very funny because you can sort of see in the background, I'll let you in on a little secret. There's like, I was making chicken and it was the inside of the chicken, and I sent it to Meredith and she was like, that is disgusting, and was actually very horrified. And I was like, I promise you, we're going to find a way and you're going to love it. It's going to be beautiful. And we just sort of kept like layering things on top. And it's sort of like, again, it's this kind of daily life sort of like, ooh, that's kind of gross, my like food in the kitchen. But then there's these kind of really lovely moments of, sort of calm and beach life. That's kind of, there's just lots of different layers in here. And I think that's really kind of the fun part, is then we kind of go back and we're like, what's actually in there? And it almost becomes unrecognizable to us when we go to like pull it apart and figure out what kind of the original source images were.
I know. I love that. I love this one now so much, even though it's chicken. It's like raw carcass.
I mean, I won't show you the original, but just take my word for it. It was pretty gross.
It was really gross.
So then, the next ones, I'll let you kind of talk about it, I guess.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the fun of it too is that we're not like, like we're committed to the project, but we're also really just enjoying exploring all the new iterations it could take. So we've recently shifted to panoramics. I think especially as we think about the idea of creating like if she can't be in New York and I can't be in London, right? They become this, and especially in, what's happening in 2021, like they're an escapist place that like these images exist on the internet, right? That you could like dive into and exist somewhere else. So, working in this sort of larger panoramic format sort of forces the idea of landscape, but also allows us to incorporate more imagery and a larger sense of space. And again, like I feel like in some of these you can recognize like some of them are out windows or of actual places of beach, but also again, like thinking about how it has impacted the people we live with. Like my husband for Valentine's Day got me LED lights. which was, like, and just how I started playing with them. They almost made like imagined landscapes themselves that we could incorporate in. And I thought it was like a thoughtful, like in a way, like an unromantic gift, but extremely personal, because he knew that, we could use them in this way. Because I know I see one of them here in the right. And I think there's one more panoramic. And I love this one so much too, because I think a lot of what we send each other, but even pre-pandemic, would be like these beautiful streams of light or shadows cast, and some are from my skylight, but especially during the pandemic, when you can't stare at a screen any longer or watch any more Netflix, and you realize, like, if you just sit still long enough, your den could become, a movie theater with, like the shadows that headlights make on the wall, or the way the light stream would change as it would go in and out of the cloud. Like the image on the left, I know is, a projection onto a beam in my den, and some of them are from skylights and shifts of light from curtains. So I love that this was one in particular where we were really playing around with composition and trying to align things. And I think there's always so much fun when you're like, oh my God, I can't believe the way those line up. Like you took that one and I took this one, and then somehow they fit exactly together like a puzzle. Is always really fun.
I think the nice thing with these is I feel like they're sort of starting to tell a bit of a story, where there's not really so much of a narrative, I think, that kind of links any of them, but somehow this kind of wider view, I think for me, and I think also for Meredith, like as we work through it, it is sort of sometimes just, it sort of serendipitously just sort of feels right. And also I think what's so nice with this is we were kind of playing more with this kind of light and shadow, and it kind of almost feels, it's like you can feel this time of day, and you can kind of feel this mood through it, that even though we're somewhere so separate, we've kind of somehow like converged in this place that we've completely made up. But there's a kind of common thread in it when you sort of layer it all together in this way. So this one, I think, is one of the first of this kind of panoramic type that we did, and I think would just kind of set the tone for where we might go afterwards. Mary, you should do this one. I love it.
So we were thinking about, what would happen next over the summer, especially now, because I teach, and I'm mostly off for the summer, just teaching less classes. But like finally now I've started to regain the headspace where I can work more deeply on creative works, but also like feel regenerated to return to technology like virtual reality. And so I've been started to play around with this idea we had, where we're taking the images and making rooms, because we also work in, like, we send each other sound back and forth, and we've been trying to figure out like where the sound could land. But if we make these virtual rooms for, like, you could view it on your smartphone in Google Cardboard or in a Vive headset, then you can attach the sound as if you're in, like, now we've been talking about this space, but now you can exist in this space. So I think if you hit play on the little, that we see, you can even, you can drag it bigger too. Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if I can, wait, sorry, it's not letting me go full screen while I share. Oh, hang on, I know what to do.
Wow.
For everyone.
Courtesy call before your warranty expires and your truck is reported. This would make you financially responsible for all services here. Press 1 now if you wish to extend or reinstate your car. Once again, press 1 then, or press 2 to be placed on the do not call list.
So in that instance, I put like an image per wall. you know, even thinking back to when we could be in gallery spaces, right? So that, you know, it would be as if each wall was covered with an image and the floor and the ceiling too. But it's very, you know, if I'm driving through McDonald's to reward my daughter for sticking out the school day on the way home and I document the sound, it's like, it's fun to add that in, you know, again, sort of documenting the mundane, but then it feels like a surprise when you see it in these quote unquote virtual rooms. But if you were in the headset, you'd be the person in that space. So you'd be able to look down and actually exist in it. So I think that's one of the next steps that the project is taking.
Yeah, this is kind of the summer project for us both. So I think we're pretty excited because we've been collecting these like sound clips. And so where Meredith is kind of creating this space, I've kind of been taking all these sounds and like layering them in, and we just kind of throw them into Logic, and it's like it's just such a combination of like so many weird things of just like what's happening. So outside of just the view of, you know, outside my door or my window or on my walk, it's like this is actually like, you know, kind of in real form. So this I think is going to be pretty exciting. So hopefully we'll keep you posted. I'm not trying to play it again. Sorry. So yeah, so this is actually just kind of where it's taken on a bit of a just a way for us to kind of archive and show our work. You know, we've just sort of started this account, so it's kind of just family and friends at the moment that are just sort of looking at it. But, you know, we'd like to kind of give it a little bit more life and eventually start kind of putting some more of this like slightly interactive work on there. So feel free to follow us and hopefully see what comes next.
Thank you so much. That was so cool. Does anyone have any questions for Meredith and Dayna? I love how you spoke about your collaboration. I thought that that was really, really interesting and cool. Not just as friends, because there's the relationship aspect, but also how your work is working together. And that was really, really interesting how you're doing that. I feel like the pieces that you've been doing, they are almost like landscapes, but they're almost like prismatic landscapes. I think probably because of the rectangular nature of photographs and film stills. It gives it almost like this prismatic type thing. It's almost magical in some interesting way. And I thought that that was really, really cool to see.
Thanks.
Does anyone have any questions?
I have one. I'm sorry. I tried to ask. I want both doing. I'm trying to get my college friend to she thought it was work on drawing. I'm trying to make something out, but it hasn't been working. Huge connection between the two of you. I wanted to ask, are you photographing with your smartphones or are you using digital cameras? What are you using for to take these pictures?
It's just our phones. Like it's like a very sort of just easy thing. Like there's not really any sort of burden of like thinking too hard about the process. It's just sort of like what happened. It was, you know, it's just naturally on my phone. So it is like a very lo-fi. I mean, I appreciate a lot of your work is like very technical and Kirsten as well, like yours is very technical. But I think it kind of works. And we sort of went, you know, should we sort of try to make this feel a little bit more like, you know, in a way it's like, does it feel like real art because it's on my phone and it's like in Google Slides? But I think the outcome for us is, you know, it still kind of yields a result that we feel, you know, like very engaged with. And I guess that's kind of the important part is I think if it was like too forced with something that felt kind of more formalized, I think it would sort of strip it away from, I guess, what our process is.
And also, yeah, and especially because maybe that's what makes us so invested in it when you have such little time in your life anyway, and to make that time match with somebody else's. So it's, you know, because it's so accessible and lo-fi, right? It doesn't feel like, maybe that's when work is real, you know, at its best, right? It doesn't feel like work. It feels like play, right? And it's like an extension of our friendship, you know, because we were always texting each other those photographs to start with. So I don't even know what would happen if we started to push it to be very technical.
No, and I think it's something really natural. It feels really natural, and at the same time really professional. I don't know if it's the whole layering and how well connected it feels, like all the images, even though you say you're layering like windows on top of like chicken. Like it's really interesting how it works, and also the color palette. Like I don't know, it's something really beautiful. Like I love color, even though I sometimes really avoid working on it, and it's something that I used to do, and Kirsten does too, and it looks beautiful. And I don't know, it feels really natural. It's something really amazing, and I well coming into that sense, what is the final edit? How, because I found that complex about taking pictures with my cell phone. I can take like 25 pictures from the same piece of cardboard that I find interesting. But I don't know how you guys are doing that. It's mostly like just knowing like what each other like, or also do you have another kind of like your own filter of like, okay, this works for me or this doesn't?
Probably a little bit of both, right? And very often we did show, I mean, if in that file, we'll have like 10 of the same one we're trying to work through. But I do think there's a mutual respect for the, like, I really trust Dayna's sense of style. I think it's very mutual to say like, okay, this is done, or this is right. Yeah.
Yeah, or we'll just kind of make a copy of something and sort of like preserve somebody else's. So I think there's a little of that kind of preservation and like respect, I think, for the other person, and just to kind of say, okay, like I love this, but let me try this. So I think because we just have like a very, a lot of trust and kind of respect for each other as friends, and I think kind of as artists in this process, it's like, it's very interesting. But I think when you're like, I take 25 pictures, like, and Kirsten was like, I can't edit. Like, I'm very guilty of that. I probably like bombard Meredith. Like, she'll wake up in the morning and she'll have like 35 images, and I'm just like, look at this shadow on my wall, and I'm just like, she must want to kill me.
No, it's the best.
At the same time, it's kind of like we'll sort of bombard each other with things, but then I think it also, sometimes it feels like a lot, and sometimes it feels like, it's pretty much always the right amount, because we have a lot of choice. So if anything, it's kind of, we built this archive that now we just have to kind of sift through, but I've like kind of memorized like what our photo library looks like, because we go through it so often, and it's like this thing that didn't really fit anywhere somehow becomes like the perfect thing for something else. So it's kind of this element of surprise. Even though you take it in one context in that moment, it doesn't really continue to live that way. It sort of takes on a whole new life every time you go back to it. So that's, I think, a lot of the fun of it.
Yeah. Thank you. It's amazing, really.
Well, thank you.
It's really inspiring, to be honest.
Well, that's really
I hope you work with your friend too.
Oh, thank you. I hope it works too.
I just wanted to say, Dayna, I love when you said how you and Meredith are in such separate spaces physically, but together in these imagined places that you create. That is like such a strong analogy for relationships during the pandemic. It's brilliant. And I think in terms of this being real art, like the way that you're modulating the opacities of these pieces and and the colors, it's brilliant. It definitely has a look of, this is fit for a gallery, not I made this on my phone.
Thank you. No, I think it was so interesting to listen to your kind of your take on your own work, where you were sort of talking about like the new developments, you're sort of layering these things. And I think it was just when Meredith and I saw, who we were going to be speaking with today, it was just, even though I think the look of all of our work is so different, like it was just sort of really interesting how I think there's a lot of parallels between all of our work, and it was just so nice to see. But that in particular like really stood out, because I could see you posting before the talk, and I was looking at it and I was like, this is so similar but so different. And it was just, that was really interesting, because I feel like we should collaborate with you or something, like, or with all of you, just because there's a lot of interesting.
I know, Maria, I can't believe you're like, oh, now I'm working on cyanotypes, and I'm like, I've been printing all week.
Yes.
So much. Well, we probably need to wrap up for today.
And it just goes to show, how shallow Instagram feels.
But I have loved this so much. So I hope that you all do collaborate and then come back to me so I can show it in the gallery.
Okay. Katie, thank you so much for bringing us together and for the show.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity. Thank you.
And thank you all for being here with me today. Thank you all to everyone who has joined us and who will be joining us in the future watching this. The support for our gallery and the support for these artists means so much to us. And once again, thank you all. This has been absolutely wonderful. I've loved hearing from you, and I've loved how you're interacting too. It's magical. I love it. Well, thank you, and we will see you next time. All right. Bye.